The memorial reads a cry of despair and a warning to humanity. Since Liberation Day in 1945, millions have visited this place. Hopefully, they take away a determination to learn from the Holocaust and never let it be repeated.
Amon Göth, often remembered as one of history's most ruthless and brutal concentration camp commandants, oversaw the horrors of Plaszow with a cruelty that shocked even his contemporaries. His name became synonymous with unchecked brutality and the darkest aspects of the Holocaust. This video delves into Göth's life, his reign of terror at Plaszow, his eventual capture, trial, and execution, and his portrayal in media. Through these insights, we strive to understand the grim legacy he left behind. Born on December 11, 1908, in Vienna, Austria, Amon Leopold Göth hailed from a middle-class family. His father, Amon Franz Göth, was a publisher, and his mother, Berta Schwendt Göth, was a housewife. As a child, Göth was noted to have an average upbringing without any particularities that would later explain or rationalize his brutal tendencies. In his youth, Vienna was a cauldron of political and cultural transformations, with various nationalist and political groups vying for dominance. The political upheaval and rising anti-Semitism of the time likely influenced Göth's early perspectives. The tumultuous environment of his hometown, combined with personal experiences and interactions, began to shape the young Amon's ideologies. Göth completed his education in Vienna, attending local schools, though there isn't much documented about his academic performance or inclination. However, by the late 1920s and early 1930s, as the allure of Nazism began to grip Austria, Göth found himself drawn to the radical right-wing movement. In 1930, at the age of 22, Göth joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, more commonly known as the Nazi Party. This decision marked a critical point in his life, setting him on a trajectory that would lead to his involvement in some of the most heinous crimes of the 20th century. He was an early adopter of Nazi ideology, joining the party even before Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany. As the years passed, Göth's association with the Nazis deepened. By 1938, he became a member of the Schutzstaffel, SS, an organization that would become infamous for its role in the Holocaust. Within the SS, he climbed ranks fairly quickly. His dedication to the Nazi cause and his fervent anti-Semitic beliefs made him stand out. Göth seemed to have internalized the core tenets of Nazism, believing in the supremacy of the Aryan race and the perceived threats posed by Jews, Romani people, and other non-Aryans. His commitment did not go unnoticed. His superiors saw in him a man willing to carry out orders without hesitation or moral compunction. By 1940, Göth was involved in action against the Jewish population, participating in operations in Poland. His roles grew more significant and more sinister, culminating in his appointment as the commandant of the Plaszow concentration camp in 1942. Situated on the outskirts of Krakow, Poland, Plaszow concentration camp stands as a haunting symbol of the Holocaust's atrocities. Its establishment was a direct result of the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto in 1942. The Nazis required a new location to house the vast number of displaced Jews, and thus, Plaszow, initially set up as a labor camp, came into existence. Built on 2 Jewish cemeteries, the camp's very foundation was an affront to the memories of the deceased, an early indication of the horrors that would unfold within its fences. Over time, the camp expanded, swallowing nearby villages and increasing its prisoner capacity. Originally intended for about 2,000 inmates, the camp's population swelled to over 25,000 at its peak, a testimony to the relentless pursuit of Jews and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. Inside Plazow's barbed wire confines, the conditions were nothing short of hellish. The camp's topography itself was challenging, with rocky and uneven grounds that made construction and other labor-intensive tasks even more strenuous. Inmates were made to work long hours, often involved in the construction of the camp's infrastructure, or in nearby stone quarries. The daily routine was punctuated with roll calls that could last for hours, during which prisoners had to stand at attention irrespective of the weather conditions. Food was scarce, and what little was provided was often rotten or inedible. Starvation was a common sight, with inmates becoming skeletal from lack of nutrition. Sanitation was dismal, leading to outbreaks of disease which would sweep through the overcrowded barracks, claiming numerous lives. There were no considerations for the health or well-being of the prisoners. They were, in the eyes of the Nazis, expendable. However, physical hardship was just one aspect of the torment. The psychological torture was relentless. Amon Göth, as the camp's commandant, was a significant contributor to this climate of fear. He was known to carry out arbitrary executions, sometimes choosing victims at random during roll calls. His unpredictable nature meant that inmates were in a perpetual state of anxiety, never knowing when they might become the target of his wrath. Dogs, trained to be vicious, were another tool of intimidation, often set upon prisoners for minor infractions or sometimes for mere amusement. The camp's guards, following Göth's lead, were ruthless, looking for any excuse to exert their authority, often violently. Tales of beatings, shootings, and other forms of physical abuse were rampant. For the inmates, moments of respite were rare. Some sought solace in clandestine religious observances, while others formed bonds of friendship and camaraderie, clinging to any semblance of humanity in an environment designed to strip it away. Acts of resistance, though dangerous, also took place. Smuggling food, medicine, or news from the outside world became small victories against the oppressive regime. Upon his appointment as the commandant of Plaszow concentration camp, Amon Göth swiftly earned a reputation for unprecedented cruelty, a distinction even among Nazi officers notorious for their brutality. His reign at Plaszow was marked not only by strict administration, but also by a sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain, fear, and death upon the camp's inmates. Göth's day-to-day role at the camp was primarily supervisory, but he was far from a distant administrator. He took an active interest in the daily operations of Plaszow, ensuring that his authority was felt at every level. He would frequently participate in morning roll calls, an occasion he often used to mete out punishment, or to make an example out of inmates for minor infractions. Sometimes he would order prisoners to be flogged, while other times he would shoot them on the spot. His unpredictable nature meant that every interaction was potentially deadly. His living quarters, a villa located just outside the camp, gave him a vantage point from which he could oversee the entire camp. It was said that he would often stand on his balcony with a rifle, taking pot shots at inmates for sport. This casual, almost recreational approach to killing showcased his deep-seated disdain for the lives of his prisoners. Among the many atrocities attributed to Göth, several stand out for their sheer brutality. On one occasion, when 3 inmates were reported to have escaped from the camp, Göth ordered the execution of 10 people for every 1 escapee, a cruel arithmetic intended to deter any further escape attempts. The chosen prisoners were lined up and shot, a chilling spectacle for the rest of the camp to witness. Another instance recalls Göth's decision to punish a group of women who had been found smuggling gunpowder into the camp to aid resistance efforts. Instead of a swift execution, he forced other inmates to stone them to death, turning prisoners against each other in a macabre display of power and control. Göth also had a particular fondness for dogs, especially his 2 German shepherds. However, these were not mere pets. They were trained to be aggressive and were frequently unleashed upon prisoners, often leading to severe injuries or death. To be sent to Göth's villa was a sentence of terror, as inmates were often mauled by his dogs as a form of punishment or interrogation. The camp's medical facilities, under Göth's direction, became sites of experimentation and torture. Prisoners were subjected to inhumane medical procedures without anesthesia, and many were sterilized or subjected to other brutal surgeries. Göth had a close association with Dr. Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death from Auschwitz, further emphasizing his deep involvement in the medical atrocities of the Holocaust. Despite the pervasive climate of fear, some inmates would dare to defy Göth. In such cases, his retaliation was swift and brutal. In one notable instance, when an inmate named Helen Jonas Rosenzweig slapped him in response to his advances, Göth had her whipped but chose to keep her as a personal maid, a position that came with its own set of dangers and humiliations. Amidst the darkness that shrouded Plaszow, the stories of its inmates, of courage, defiance, and an undying hope, shine brightly as beacons of human resilience. Every person interned at Plaszow carried with them a unique narrative, a testimony of their will to survive in the face of overwhelming adversity. One such account is that of Poldek Pfefferberg, a Jewish teacher and athlete. Pfefferberg's quick thinking and resourcefulness saved not only his life, but also those of several others. On one occasion, when he was about to be executed for a minor infraction, he managed to convince the guards of his expertise in enamelware, an industry crucial to the war effort. By positioning himself as indispensable, he secured a relatively safer position within the camp's workshops and subsequently used his influence to protect fellow inmates from the harshest of labors. Another compelling narrative comes from Helen Hirsch, a young Jewish woman who became Göth's personal maid. Despite the precariousness of her position, she managed to survive Göth's unpredictable temper and cruel games. Her interactions with him gave her insights into the twisted psyche of her tormentor, and she used this knowledge to navigate her days, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Then there's the tale of Abraham Bankier, the manager of Oskar Schindler's enamelware factory. Bankier used his close association with Schindler, a member of the Nazi Party, to shield many of his Jewish workers from deportations and exterminations. His subtle acts of defiance, such as manipulating lists and ensuring his workers were seen as essential to the war effort, meant life over death for many. The camp also witnessed acts of collective resistance. Secret religious ceremonies were conducted, where inmates would gather to pray, sing, and provide solace to one another. These gatherings, albeit small, were profound acts of defiance against the Nazi attempt to strip prisoners of their identity and faith. One of the most daring tales of survival comes from the inmates involved in the underground resistance within the camp. These brave individuals smuggled information, food, and even weapons into Plaszow. Their acts of sabotage and their efforts to document the atrocities taking place were instrumental in raising awareness about the Holocaust and rallying support from the outside. But defiance against Göth's tyranny wasn't always overt. Small acts, such as sharing food, tending to the sick, or simply offering a comforting word, became revolutionary in a place designed to obliterate hope and compassion. Many inmates held on to memories of their families, their past lives, and their dreams for the future, using these as anchors to pull themselves through each torturous day. In the shadow of death, relationships blossomed. Friendships, romances, and even mentor-mentee bonds formed, providing inmates with the emotional support crucial for survival. Stories of parents sacrificing their meager rations for their children, or of strangers becoming family, are testimonials to the indomitable human spirit. As World War II neared its conclusion, the once seemingly invincible Third Reich found itself cornered on multiple fronts. Allied forces advanced steadily, retaking occupied territories and pushing deeper into German heartland. With the writing on the wall, many Nazi officials and collaborators tried to cover up evidence of their heinous crimes, hoping to escape retribution. Amon Göth was no exception. In the early months of 1945, the reality of defeat was palpable. Plaszow concentration camp was systematically dismantled, with many of its inmates sent on grueling death marches or transported to other extermination camps. Göth, ever the opportunist, tried to secure his escape. He fled Plaszow, hoping to disappear amidst the chaos and evade the rapidly advancing Allied forces. However, Göth's monstrous reputation preceded him. His escape would be short-lived. In May 1945, shortly after the war's official conclusion, Amon Göth was captured by the American military in Bad Tolz, Bavaria. Recognized for the terror he had wrought at Plaszow, he was promptly arrested and held for trial. The subsequent legal proceedings aimed to bring Göth to justice for his crimes against humanity. He faced a litany of charges, the gravity of which reflected the depth of his depravity. Among these were the mass murders of thousands of inmates, individual acts of violence, inhumane treatment, and the forced labor of prisoners under his command. The testimonies of survivors, those who had endured the horrors of Plaszow firsthand, played a pivotal role in the trial. Their accounts painted a chilling picture of life under Göth's rule, revealing a man who derived pleasure from the suffering of others. Stories of arbitrary executions, cruel punishments, and sadistic games provided damning evidence of his crimes. Moreover, administrative records, correspondence, and other documents from the camp further corroborated these personal testimonies, leaving little room for defense. As the trial progressed, Göth's demeanor was that of arrogance and defiance. Despite the overwhelming evidence stacked against him, he frequently denied the charges, often blaming subordinates or resorting to the typical defense of just following orders. But the weight of the testimonies, the sheer volume of voices that bore witness to his atrocities was undeniable. In the end, justice would be served. Göth was found guilty on numerous counts of murder, both individual and mass, as well as for the continued persecution and inhumane treatment of inmates. His role as the mastermind behind countless crimes against humanity at Plaszow was undisputed. The gravity of his crimes, coupled with the irrefutable evidence presented during the trial, left no doubt about the verdict. Amon Göth was sentenced to death. The trial of Amon Göth was a focal point for the world's attention, a moment when the grotesque machinations of the Holocaust were laid bare for all to see. Central to the proceedings were the testimonies of survivors, witnesses who had lived through the horror of Plaszow and endured Göth's brutal reign. Their voices, filled with pain, anger, and resilience, echoed through the courtroom, painting a vivid portrait of the atrocities committed. One after the other, survivors took to the stand, recounting their experiences under Göth's command. Their stories, each unique yet bound by shared trauma, unveiled the systemic and individual acts of violence that were a daily occurrence at Plaszow. They spoke of the arbitrary executions during roll calls, the cruel games Göth played with inmates' lives, and the unrelenting fear that gripped every moment of their captivity. A former inmate recounted how Göth had once lined up prisoners, choosing every 10th person to be shot merely as a macabre demonstration of his authority. Another survivor described the gut-wrenching dread of being summoned to his villa, knowing that such an invitation could result in a fatal encounter with his vicious dogs or Göth's own violent whims. Testimonies also highlighted Göth's exploitation of prisoners for personal gain. Witnesses detailed how he would force skilled artisans and professionals to work exclusively for him, crafting luxury items or providing services, all while living under the threat of death should they fail to please him. Photographs, too, played a role in the trial. Images of emaciated prisoners, mass graves, and the camp's brutal conditions were displayed, adding a haunting visual dimension to the testimonies. One particularly harrowing image showed a large group of prisoners moments before a mass execution, with Göth discernible in the background, overseeing the atrocity. Throughout the proceedings, Göth maintained a veneer of indifference, often dismissing testimonies as fabrications or attempts at revenge. However, the sheer volume of accounts, corroborated by material evidence, made it impossible to deny the truth of his actions. The conviction of Amon Göth marked the beginning of the end for one of the Holocaust's most reviled figures. With the weight of irrefutable evidence and a litany of testimonies, his fate was sealed. But even as the day of his execution approached, the specter of Göth's brutality continued to loom, and his last days were tinged with a mix of anticipation and somber reflection. Confined to his cell in Krakow's Montelupich prison, Göth's demeanor in the days leading up to his execution was a study in contrasts. At times, he appeared resigned, the inevitability of his fate seemingly having settled upon him. On other occasions, he displayed bursts of his characteristic arrogance, dismissive of the charges and defiant to the last. Prison staff and fellow inmates observed his erratic behavior. Some spoke of moments when Göth seemed genuinely introspective, possibly grappling with the weight of his actions. Others noted his seemingly insatiable need to dominate conversations, still trying to exert control even within the confines of his cell. On the morning of September 13, 1946, the prison complex was shrouded in an oppressive silence. The atmosphere was palpable, a mix of tension, relief, and a shared understanding of the historic significance of the day's events. Göth was led from his cell to the execution grounds. Witnesses to the event described him as oddly composed, his usual imposing stature somewhat diminished. As he approached the gallows, a few murmurs and gasps broke the silence, but the crowd was largely quiet, the solemnity of the moment overshadowing any outbursts. The official proceedings were brief. A final statement was read out, summarizing the charges and the verdict. Göth, given a chance to speak, offered no profound insights or apologies. His last words, much like his life, were shrouded in ambiguity and self-interest. Then, with a suddenness that caught many off guard, the trapdoor was released, and Amon Göth's reign of terror was conclusively ended. The crowd, which had been mostly silent, erupted in a mix of emotions. Some wept, others embraced, and a few even cheered. But the overarching sentiment was one of grim satisfaction, a feeling that, at least in this instance, justice had been served. News of Göth's execution spread rapidly, making headlines around the world. Reactions varied, with many expressing relief and support for the verdict, while others debated the ethics of capital punishment, even for figures as reviled as Göth. In the aftermath, Göth's execution became a symbol of the broader efforts to hold Nazi war criminals accountable. While no act of retribution could ever truly atone for the horrors of the Holocaust, the trials and subsequent convictions of its architects, including Göth, sent a clear message: the world would not forget, and such atrocities must never be allowed to happen again. The shadow of Amon Göth, long after his death, remains a dark blemish on the pages of history. His crimes, while representative of the broader Nazi ideology, stand out for their sheer cruelty and sadism. The passage of time has done little to diminish the horror associated with his name, and his legacy serves as a haunting reminder of humanity's capacity for evil. In post-war narratives, Göth often epitomizes the sadistic concentration camp commandant, a figure who wielded power with ruthless efficiency and seemed to derive pleasure from the suffering of others. This portrayal, while accurate, also underscores the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences when it falls into the wrong hands. Plaszow, under Göth's command, became a microcosm of the Holocaust's larger machinery of death, a place where humanity was routinely degraded and life held little value. Yet Göth's legacy is not solely one of brutality. His story and the stories of countless other perpetrators also serve as cautionary tales, urging subsequent generations to remain vigilant against the rise of hate, prejudice, and bigotry. In an age where revisionist narratives and Holocaust denial still find traction, the importance of remembering figures like Göth becomes even more paramount. They stand as stark reminders of the depths to which humanity can sink when influenced by divisive ideologies. Various memorials and museums dedicated to the Holocaust, from Yad Vashem in Jerusalem to the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Poland, prominently feature accounts of Göth's cruelty. These institutions play a crucial role in educating the public, ensuring that the lessons from this dark chapter of history are not lost. They emphasize the value of tolerance, empathy, and understanding, qualities that are antithetical to the beliefs Göth held. Additionally, popular culture has played its part in preserving the memory of Amon Göth's crimes. Films like Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, in which Göth is portrayed by actor Ralph Fiennes, bring the horrors of Plaszow and its infamous commandant to a global audience. While such representations can never fully capture the depth of suffering endured by victims, they play a pivotal role in fostering awareness and encouraging dialogue about the Holocaust. The cinematic landscape has been instrumental in bringing historical events to a wider audience, bridging gaps between documented facts and public perception. Among such influential films, Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List holds a special place, not just for its impeccable storytelling, but for its portrayal of the Holocaust's horrifying realities. Within this haunting narrative, the depiction of Amon Göth stands as one of the film's most chilling elements. Released in 1993, Schindler's List is based on the true story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved over 1,000 Polish Jewish refugees during the Holocaust by employing them in his factories. But while Schindler's character, masterfully portrayed by Liam Neeson, is the film's beating heart, Ralph Fiennes' portrayal of Amon Göth provides its chilling backbone. Fiennes' Göth is cold, detached, and merciless, embodying the character's historical reputation. Through his nuanced performance, Fiennes captures the essence of a man whose capricious cruelty made life in Plaszow a living nightmare for its inmates. Scenes where Göth stands on his balcony, randomly shooting inmates, or the chilling interactions he has with his Jewish maid, Helen Hirsch, encapsulate the unpredictable and savage nature of his character. Schindler's List does not shy away from displaying the harsh truths of the Holocaust. The black and white cinematography, punctuated only by occasional flashes of color, accentuates the grim atmosphere and the stark differences between the world of the oppressors and the oppressed. In this grayscale landscape, Göth's character is a constant source of tension and fear, exemplifying the Nazi regime's dehumanizing ideologies. However, while the film's portrayal of Göth is rooted in historical accounts, it's essential to note that cinematic depictions often involve a degree of dramatization for narrative effect. Spielberg, ever the masterful storyteller, ensures that Göth is not reduced to a mere caricature of evil. Instead, through nuanced storytelling and Fiennes's powerful performance, the film explores the depths of human depravity while simultaneously highlighting the resilience and strength of the human spirit. The inclusion of Göth in Schindler's List serves as a grim reminder of the Holocaust's horrors, ensuring that viewers confront the reality of what occurred during this dark period. Fiennes's portrayal, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, remains one of the most haunting depictions of a historical figure in cinematic history.